This podcast is sponsored by Camera Museum of London and Tang Cigars, located at 44 Museum Street, London. Welcome to a Fish Out of Water podcast. This is your host, Richard Lipman. Today, we're interviewing Finlay Pretsell.
Working, can't hear me, can't see me. It's like, I don't know whatever happens really, but anyway, it's boring, isn't it?
Okay, let me just get to my notes. One moment.
I'll just arrange my hair. Very important.
This is strictly an audio podcast.
Oh, right. Okay,
this is an audio podcast. Finlay Pretsell, can you tell us how you got into films?
Yeah, kind of by mistake, I suppose. It's I did a variety of very mundane jobs. The last one being a pensions administrator. So I would quote pensions to people. Extremely boring. But I think from that, one of the main things, it taught me how to write a good email, which is kind of important when you're making films. But I think all these jobs, I left school and thought, I've got no idea what I want to do for the next 4 years as have a degree or whatever. I had no idea. I had various ideas of wanting to do something visual and artistic, but the thought of actually doing that, spending 4 years studying, just seemed a bit, it didn't quite work. So I wanted to make a living, really. I wanted to earn money. And so I just did hundreds of different jobs. And, after a few months, you'd get bored and want to move on or get sacked or whatever it would be, And then I suppose there was a turning point in my life where my dad died. And that, I think, for me, shifted my mentality into thinking, right, what am I doing? I'm wasting valuable time here. It's a kind of cliche in a way, but it must have been 25 at the time, and it really kind of kicked me up the arse to say, right, do whatever you want to do. So I knew it was something visual. My parents are both artists, teachers, so they'd always kind of taught me how to look at things in a way, and I would tag along to a million exhibition openings in Edinburgh, where I grew up. And I suppose I would take it in, by osmosis, even if I was only looking forward to the ice cream at the end of it, as a kind of the treat. And then I was constantly trying to find the jobs within the visual arts, and I would just randomly ask people. I would volunteer at the Edinburgh Festival, the film festival, BBC Radio. A friend of mine worked there, so she kind of hooked me up with like a kind of these placements, So, and I think it started making me think, with people, I kind of can speak to people, and then I stumbled upon the Scottish Documentary Institute, where that was really the thing that turned me into saying, I want to make films, I want to make documentary films. And during that time, I worked at Edinburgh College of Art, where the Documentary Institute is based. Just by being there, hanging around, I didn't get paid at first, and then they started paying me because I was just desperate to do something, to do something more interesting than quoting pensions, which is like the most mundane job in the world. But I suppose during that time, it allowed me to ride my bike, race my bike. That was my big thing. Was racing bikes. But towards the end of that, around about the time my dad died, it was like, I'm no good at this. I can't do it. I'm not a I'm not going to be a professional cyclist. So that was fine. And so I pursued this career of making these, films, I suppose. And I met this guy called Adrian McDowall. We worked together. I was coming up with these ideas and thinking, as I suppose, exercises rather than films, just because I could get my hands on camera equipment. And I thought, well, let's try and do things, And I think what Adrian did, who he had made films before, he was teaching at the art college, and he kind of upped my thoughts or my game and made me think, well, why don't we make a film, and why don't we try and ask this person who's an expert in what he does rather than just a random person. It's like, and it kind of just built it from there. And then I suppose with my always thinking about wanting to earn a living, I'd never not had a job. I never didn't work. So I saw that, well, maybe we could raise a little bit of money to make this film, the first film, which was called Standing Star, which is actually about a Scottish Olympic cyclist called Craig McLean, who was contemporaries with Chris Hoy and all of the rest of it. And so that kind of, it just kind of happened in a way that I just happened to be around this, and just desperate to do something with my, that was more interesting than what I'd done for the last, 10 years. So, yeah. And I think that was it. And I did try and do a 1-year course at college, but I barely turned up. I wasn't interested in it. It just didn't get me. I think I'd always had this slight issue with being taught by teachers. I think at school I did okay at school, but not. Yeah, I think that authority I didn't like somehow. Even though I would get on well with the teachers, but I would just, if they asked me to do something, I would be kind of somehow reluctant. And I think that kind of followed on in formal teaching situations, And then maybe actually when that came to the art college, I would sit in on lots of discussions there. And I think that actually I was like, this is so informal, and it's about what you bring to it and what you do, rather than them saying you get taught this and that's when you be able to do that. And yeah, so I never studied filmmaking, which which is both good and bad, I suppose. But yeah.
Yeah, many of the greats did not formally, study filmmaking, on an academic level. Standing Start, what was your contribution to the film? What did you actually do during the filming? And was it easy?
Standing Start?
Yes.
Oh, no. What did I do during the filming? It was a kind of complicated process, and I think co-direction is something that it was fine for me at first, because I think I was learning a lot at the time, So you would have your ideas, and and Adrian and I had a really great relationship, that we were almost like we had the same thoughts about things. We had the same ideas about things. And and because we would talk so much, we would be constantly in touch. We would form ideas together. And when it came to filming, there was lots of logistics, because it was a bike race and in a velodrome, and to try and make it an interesting visual study of this cyclist who is the end of what his race is 20 seconds. That is one flying lap of the velodrome. It's like to try and make that interesting, and this build up to that, and the preparation, and that's his life, that's all he does, and then boom, he does this 20 seconds, which seems like a bizarre thing to do, you know, in life, to focus your career on 20 seconds. But yeah, he was good at it and he did it and well. But I think, yeah, during the filming, we would be very, it would be very smooth between us, actually. One would do something, someone else would do something else, one would be adjusting camera or speaking to Craig, or, you know, setting up the next scene when the other person was overseeing one scene. It was really perfect. And we did these other films that, so Standing Start ended up, I think it was nominated or shortlisted for a Grierson Award, and then it did lots of festivals, and then we did this other film called Mabar, which was about an old weightlifter, 76-year-old weightlifter, champion weightlifter, and he was a brilliant character. And it's a far more simpler film, that, and I think it did incredibly well. It went, you know, won the Scottish BAFTA. It went to Sundance. It did a million festivals, was bought by TV and all that stuff, and it did really well. But I think there was a slight confusion after that, because you're like, oh, we put our heart and soul into Standing Start, and we did with Mabar too. But Mabar, I think, because of Standing Start and the process we went through with an athlete and that mentality, it made Mabar come together really easily and simply. And the film, as a result, is kind of simple, you know? And I think it was like, oh, that's, yeah, what, why was that so, not easy, it wasn't easy, but it was like, how did that come about so kind of organically and simply, in a way? So but yeah, what we do, it's funny, there's like some commissioning editor many years ago asked what we did, who does what in a co-directing role. And I remember both of us being like, oh, we couldn't answer it, you know, we couldn't say, oh, well, Adrian's good with this and I'm good with that, or it wasn't organized. And I think it was perfect. I think during that time, after that, we made another film in a prison, in Scottish prisons, called Cutting Loose. And that's where it became complicated, because I think I was maybe more wanted to do things a certain way, and Adrian wanted to do things more his way, because it was a kind of few years after. And I think it just became a bit of a, I don't know, it didn't work as well, I suppose, you know.
Was it like a tug of war?
Slightly, yeah. And I mean, it's not, we still friends, we still talk, but I think it just became a bit, oh, well, yeah. And I think with that film as well, it was incredibly stressful environment we were in, you know, and we spoke to so many prisoners that were just, we thought we'd go in and the prisoners would think we were just a pair of, like, you know, idiots, like, with their long hair, and, oh, we want to make a beautiful film in prisons, and they would just want to beat us up. But they absolutely just, I mean, it opened up and wanted to speak to us, and we would just be sat there with an audio recorder, and they would just unload for like 2-3 hours maybe, and all of this kind of abuse that they'd been through, and Adrian and I were just like, I mean, I think that's when, after we would just be burnt out after these like days that we would spend in these prisons. And I think that, and it's very, very heavy what they're talking about, you know. And I think after, we were like, oh, wow, it's tough to deal with, in a way, you know. And it's but fascinating and incredible kind of access we got in the end. But I think that point, and also ways like that audio way of making films, like when you're just recording audio, you get an incredible intimacy with people because there's no camera there, but it really created a headache for editing, you know,
Yeah.
because you've got
Right.
hours of interview, and there's something, even if there was just a camera in the background, you could see somebody would be helpful, even if it is in the film or not. It's like, I think that incredibly difficult just to listen to these things, you know. It's like, yeah. So
And how did you decide what to take out?
oh, it's impossible. I think what we were really keen on was to make them, if they were, because we interviewed many different inmates, and I think they were, as long as they had some kind of remorse in them, you know, they weren't like full of themselves, and all of them were remorseful, but one girl in particular wasn't so much, and we had a real struggle with her because we wanted the women in it because they were part of this prison hairdressing competition, so which went from all these different prisons in Scotland, and on one day they had this competition. So it's mostly male hairdressers, you know, or barbers, and the female prison obviously had the, the other, these hairdressers that were actually dealing with much more complicated hairstyles, you know, as the women that they were that they used as models. But they were, yeah, and I think one of them had done a horrible crime, and it was incredibly difficult for her to, like, for us to kind of find anything in what she was saying that was like, yeah, I fucked up, and it was a fucking terrible thing we did. Essentially, she committed this crime with someone else, and it's like, that was, yeah, so that was difficult. And I think that as long as we could find some kind of remorse or softness in them that was behind this tough appearance, then I think that was our filter in a way, you know. But incredibly hard to do with so many interviews, you know. But yeah.
And then you had a gap for 6 years. What were you doing between 2011 and 2017?
Yeah, making that last film. But yeah, well, it kind of is like that. I mean, I did produce some short films, and I produced a fiction feature film as well, called Norfolk, through BFI and BBC Films and Creative England. But yeah, essentially right after Cutting Loose, it propelled me into thinking, right, I need to make this film that I've always wanted to make, you know, the film that like drove me to make all the other films in a way, and about David Millar, or about this. I suppose essentially the idea was that murky ground of a cyclist in the back of a peloton, not the big champions that you hear about, Lance Armstrong, Geraint Thomas, all the huge stars. The people that are in the kind of background. There's hundreds of cyclists on the road at the Tour de France, but you only ever really hear about the top few riders. So that was the idea. And David was Scottish. He, you know, came from essentially came from Scotland, and he'd had an incredible career, really. You know, he was a bit of a superstar. There's been nobody since, well, Robert, there was another one called Robert Millar, who's a fantastic rider, but they're no relation. But he was kind of like he was a similar age to me, you know. You would hear him speak, and he'd be very eloquent, and he had this kind of interesting story that he wanted to go to art school, but he chose professional cycling. And so it'd always been in the back of my mind to make this film. And I think having that, he was always extremely proud of being Scottish and coming from Scotland. And he barely really lived in Scotland, you know, but he was really proud of that, the roots where he came from. And when he was caught for taking drugs, he was, I suppose, a very kind of in a very Calvinistic way, he just admitted to using the drugs for very specific events where he was like stripped of titles, where he didn't need to do that. He could have done what pretty much all of them do, is just keep quiet about various things, various moments where he took drugs, because he could have got away with stuff. But I think what I liked about him is he just did that, and he just said, right, fuck it, it's a clean slate. I want out of this sport. I'm going to tell everything. And then whatever happens after that is what happens. You know, it's like, and I like that about him. So what was I doing in those few years? Well, yeah, producing these films, and also working at the Scottish Documentary Institute, distributing various short films and helping others make feature-length documentaries. But I think the process of making that film was incredibly complicated, from all the permissions, the like raising the money. It was an impossible feat, really, because it's expensive trying to film professional sport. It's so we it was also, I think I was quite specific on how I wanted to make the film. It had to be an experience. You had to feel like you're in the race, and you're part of it, you know, and you're all with the sounds and the so at the end I wanted people to feel exhausted, like they'd ridden the race themselves, you know. And you know, there'd be one documentary to be made, or about David Millar, and it would have been, I think, a film that had been, in my mind, a film that had been made many times before, you know. And I wanted to come at a different point of view. I wanted to take people that knew nothing about cycling and put them on this bike, and so they could understand the thrill and the pain and the difficulty of it, and the mental sensations, I suppose. And but to do that, you've got to have a camera, motorbike in the race. You've got to have these onboard cameras. You've got to have the access, you know, the access to these races. They've got to trust you that you're not going to get in the way of their big money television broadcasters that are paying a lot more money than we were, which is their bread and butter, you know. And the team had to understand that we were respecting everything, and we would disappear. And so David too, and the other guy in the film, Thomas Decker, was, you know, he had to be okay with us and be happy with us to be there. So there was a lot of wrangling, you know. And I think we did one big, we would do many kind of almost test shoots where we would go to the Tour de France and incognito and just try and see what we could shoot with the team, with David, and at the race, which was near impossible to get anything, because you can't get into the race without these passes, and you know, they're very heavy-handed. So we went to like many races to try and understand what the film is and how we can make it. Went to a really low-key race in Oman, which, you know, again, to try and see if we could do this, and to meet various people while we're doing that, the team, the organization of the Tour de France, and so many bits and pieces to do, you know. And I think in that, the year before we shot it, which was 2013, that's when we'd raised enough money to say, right, this is how we're going to shoot it. We've adapted a camera motorbike, and so it was like a kind of test run in a way. And and a lot of that footage is in the film as well. It's not like it just was test and then we threw it out. But our big, it was to kind of feel in the moment of this race, which most of the footage does come from 2014. But I think it's just an incredibly difficult race to manage unless you have millions of pounds. Like you could just have so many people at the side of the road, lots of motorbikes, tons of editors and edit assistants, and then you would be able to make a film. But that's obviously not the reality. So you have to be very economical with your camera people, your sound people, your assistants, or whatever it is, you need for those races. So we couldn't do it without a fairly big crew for especially for the race stuff. Not for the kind of more intimate things, we would just be a very small crew. But the crew would be like 15 people. So, and it's also like with the process of making documentary, it's so great in so many ways because you almost can go at any point. You raise a little bit of money, you shoot something, you come back, you edit it, you have ideas, and then you shoot something else, raise a bit more money. That's kind of how it worked. But it just means the process is very slow, And by the time we got to that like final year of 2014, it was like, well, we have to do it. There's no other way because David's going to retire. And it's and that was a good, like, not a good deadline. We were wanted to make the film, but for that time, but it's And then after we shot the film, then we still needed to raise money. So we were constantly, trying to raise money, which is a long and painful process, but.
I can see that David Millar was very comfortable with you. Is that because you both have a similar background in cycling and arts, or what was it like getting access to David?
Well, I think I met him at a very particular time where he'd just kind of come back from his ban, and he wasn't at the peak of his powers in a way, which was definitely before his ban. He was like a big kind of champion. And I think during that kind of ban, the 2 years, he had a lot of time to think and process things and kind of, And I think I met him when he'd just come back from that and he would just go into this kind of new team. So there was a kind of humbleness to him, if you like. And I think it was just because he was I managed to get him a copy of Standing Start, actually, the first film I made with Adrian. And I remember trying to arrange to meet him at this kind of dinner that he was a guest at, a cycling fundraising dinner he was a guest at, and my friend told me that he was coming, and I was like, all right, okay, I'm going to send him this film and I'm going to meet him there. So he watched that film and he came to me at the table and he knelt at the table and said, I watched that film. I've watched it 12 times last week. It's amazing. It's exactly what I've always dreamt of a film about cycling could be about. And very much that film was about him, about Craig McLean, and being on the bike with him and experiencing the sensations of racing. So I think he had this idea, I'd love to do something like that and be part of it, And so that night we kind of spent, hours really talking and drinking and, getting to know each other. And then I went out to see him in Girona, and he was incredibly, he easygoing and welcoming, really. And I think he really, because these guys, they have, on the face of it, they have really nice lives. They get paid fairly well. They live in nice countries and they're traveling and they're respected for what they do. But they kind of live a little bit, they're in a very constricted life. They have to follow certain rules. They have to train, or they don't win, or they're not good on their bikes, and strict eating regimes. So I think he didn't really know many people from back home, Scotland, really. And I think it probably had something to do with it initially. And then it just became, we were attached to each other. We had, we were right. We need to do this, in a way. We'd almost gone too far, and it's a strange relationship you have with your characters sometimes, just to try and, because he gave us all the access I ever wanted, and he would organize things, and he would arrange things that we couldn't do, access to the team, or introduce us to the boss of the Tour de France, but he would just let us into his home. And he was, but it was difficult. It's a difficult thing, like, to manage. You would constantly phone him up and be like, "Oh, David, it would be great if we could do this, and could you organize that?" And they're really busy. He had a busy life. I'm sure he still does, but like, very busy when they're racing, because they're traveling constantly, and they're trying to be at their home with their family and adjust to being at home, and then they're away again. And so, it was difficult to be with each other all the time, but he was really graceful. And I suppose that he understood what I was trying to do all the time, which is the massive gift, because it's a collaboration at the end of the day with a subject. They have to understand on some level what you're trying to do and trying to achieve. And I think it was always this kind of experience side of it that he was adamant that we had to get cameras on bikes and have a motorbike in the peloton, which I was too. But that helped that he was, that he was pushing certain things.
Okay. So in terms of the visual, the style, and certainly the vision. So you both had a vision. Was that the first thing you talked about, or one of the first things you talked about with David?
Yeah, it was really the experience that it's like, I've always tried to come up with another kind of word for it, but it was the experience that we were trying to go for, this sensory that put you on that bike, that you could hear what it felt like to be there, And I think that's always, like, there's a scene where, they're climbing this hill and they're back and forward, and it kind of tends to make people feel a bit seasick, or it can do in the cinema. But to me, that's a sensation. That's a good thing, and the whole film really is quite claustrophobic in a way, Yeah. And I think that is how they live their lives. It's not like they go, and when they do the Tour de France for 21 days, they're not looking at the scenery and kind of enjoying the landscapes or the sea or the mountains. They don't really see any of it. They're just doing their thing, and then they're in the bus, and then they're in the hotel resting, then they're up again the next day, eating, riding the bikes for 5-6 hours.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's like, I think that's what we kind of bonded over, And he did have this idea that he wanted it to be beautiful, but I don't know what he meant by that exactly, because I think the Tour de France, just by its essence, is very beautiful, with the landscapes, the colors, and all of that. It's very beautiful, and I don't think the film is beautiful in that way. I think it's much more kind of brutally brutal in a way, brutally beautiful, you know. So yeah, I think we did bond over that, yeah, in the end. But yeah.
Yeah, there were challenges as well. I could see, yeah, it is a film that is big screen film. You see, I think it works really well in the cinema where everything
Yeah.
around you is dark and you can
Oh,
really focus on the experience.
absolutely, yeah. No, that absolutely. That was always the intention as well. I mean, that's not a I don't think that's a joke to say that, or like I think everybody thinks so many documentaries, people like, oh, it has to be in the cinema and it has to be here. But I don't think that many documentaries deserve, or it sounds a bit cynical, but or should be necessarily screened in a cinema.
Mhm.
It doesn't. Be, but we were adamant, or I was adamant, that it had to be in that cinema. It had to be this almost 360 experience, and you're locked into watching this film. I think it works really nicely on a laptop as well, but you know, you can almost feel like you're in a, you know, computer game or something, you know. But definitely it's a very cinematic sport. It's and the way we captured it was, you know, and it was very much this visually this real collaboration between me and the DOP Martin Radic. You know, he was incredibly. We would always go. He had no interest in cycling, which nobody really in the crew had any interest in cycling apart from me.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Which was I think that was a
Mm.
deliberate choice, you know, because people get so caught up in the race. I had a couple of camera guys who were really interested in, you know, second camera people that are dead interested in cycling, but they would miss things, or they would get carried away with seeing, oh, Vincenzo Nibali or Lance Armstrong or whoever it was that was there. They would, you know, be in awe of them. Whereas someone like Martin Radic couldn't care less who he's looking at. You know, he would be in amongst the peloton. He wouldn't care if he was offending some cyclist, and that's what you want, you know, to really focus on capturing that really small detail of what we were trying to do. And yeah, but
How,
very much, yeah,
how
collaboration.
did you manage the edit and the music? Did you collaborate strongly with the editor and the musician, or did you allow them a sort of freedom of?
No, we with the edit for sure. It was working. I worked very closely with this guy Kieran Gosney, who we sat for hours in an edit suite together. You know, so many hours going through things, trying things out. He actually was like more kind of assistant editing, or he wasn't really doing. He'd done a couple of shorts, and he kind of assisted us to manage all this footage when we came back and log it and transcode it and, you know, organize it initially. And then you know, while he was doing that, I would say, oh, let's try and put together a kind of scene. Like the very obvious one is the time trial scene initially, where the film starts. The short, the race, the I think it's a 10-kilometer race. The scene is about 15 minutes, and we captured it from all these different angles. So I wanted us to see how it was captured from these different angles. So he would just lay down these scenes very simply. And then other obvious one is the scene where David's struggling to put his jacket on, which is a brilliant scene. It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorites, really.
I
And
call it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that those things. So, and I kind of he had a certain kind of flair about what he was doing, and a tirelessness about him, that he'd watched all his footage, but he was happy to do that, and he would just we could sit there and watch stuff constantly, and constantly just try things out, chuck it away, try someone else out. It's got something, put it to the side. He's very quick that way and very unprecious about things, where I think if it was a more experienced editor, they'd maybe come in and go, oh, fucking hell, this is like colossal. This is too much, you know, it's 500 hours or something of just guys riding bikes, you know, mostly. And so he had logged all this stuff. He'd gone through it all, and then he was kind of starting to cut it. So we just sat there. We realized as well that this is going to take a long time. So regardless, even if we had a big editor, having said that, we had this other guy, Swedish guy, Dino Jonsatter, who made these fiction films called Let the Right One In and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and he, you know, he's a really experienced editor. And we were speaking to him all the way through, and he was a big fan of cycling, but he was like kind of guided us through this process the whole time. And and I think, and then towards the end, he kind of got more involved, hands-on, you know, which was a kind of relief. We needed that another energy to come in and, you know, mix things up a bit. And because you just get, you know, bamboozled after so long. It must have been a couple of years, really. We did it, Kieran and I, in that room, which was amazing. We pretty much got to the end of these cuts and made, you know, we put these assemblies together, you know, and yeah, so we were constantly with each other. In terms of Dan Deacon, the composer, he's a brilliant musician, you know. He's the electronic musician, and for me, I knew he could do what he would bring to it. And so the opening scene and the end scene is this track that was a track from one of his albums that we'd always used. And we, you know, using temp music, we would constantly use it. It would be okay for a couple of weeks, and then we'd bin it because it was just like unbearable after a while. However, this one track that Dan had, we would keep coming back to it, and it worked perfectly. It never stopped working. So, and it's still there today. So I knew that's what we could do, and I knew that he was such a brilliant composer that he lives in Baltimore as well. So we work closely together, but he would basically do a whole load of tracks, send them over, never tell us where each track should be. Very basic tracks at first that we would lay over the certain scenes. We would choose scenes. We would say, oh, that doesn't work. This isn't good. Can you speed this up here? And, you know, no, yeah, it was very close. And eventually I went over to Baltimore and we worked on it together in his studio, which was an amazingly privileged, pleasant, amazing thing to do. You know, it was such a pleasure sitting there and adjusting this amazing music that he'd created, you know. So
interesting. And how did you originally pitch the idea? Did you have to write a document, or was it a face-to-face pitch?
Always a full treatment, yeah. And this treatment changed constantly, like almost like a few months would go by and we'd be pitching it to someone else and we'd have to readjust it, or it constantly changes. And we pitched it at Sheffield Meat Market, at the IDFA Forum as well, which are these really prestigious, the biggest in the world, really, you know. And we pitched it there like 2012. The film came out in 2017, like 5 years after. 2012, 2013, I think. Maybe it's 2012. But this pitch document completely changes. We raised a lot of money through private investment, because we knew that the film was going to cost a lot of money, and we knew it was going to be incredibly difficult to edit. where broadcasters we'd speak to a lot of broadcasters initially, and they were, oh, we're going to need it for the Tour de France on the 2015, or we're going to need it for this, that. And we were like, there's no way we can try and fit into that, that kind of schedule that a broadcaster needs it and a budget for that year that they have it from. So we're like, we have to try and find another way. And cycling was booming, still is, but back then it was like really kind of starting to come up into the kind of, not the mainstream, but a lot of very wealthy people were doing it, coming into, it's like the new golf. So we thought, oh, brilliant, there's an opportunity here for these people to get involved with this fantastic film and all the rest of it. But the key thing that we did not have, I don't know anyone who's got any kind of wealth, that has money that can invest in films. I do now, but that was through that process of making a film, and it's all about connections. I think, other people might have been able to put that together much more easily than us. But Sonia and I, the producer, Sonia Henrizi, it was just such a slog to try and unearth these people and then find a way to get them to invest in the film. And there's some amazing folk we met, and they put money into the film, which was like a huge gift. And they just just not blind faith, not at all, but we had obviously this document, and we would put together a lot of clips and various things, and we would show them in a cinema, get them properly kind of sound designed and with music and graded beautifully, so they would look really good in a cinema, which, but they were amazing that they would just come in, and then towards the end they gave us a bit more, few of them, and it was kind of like not crowdfunding, and the amount of people that said, oh, you should do crowdfunding and all that. Crowdfunding's a huge job in itself, and we did kind of toy with the idea, but it's like, I don't know, it's incredibly not exposing, but you're very much out there when you're crowdfunding, and I think that's
certain broadcasters don't like it either. They don't like being attached to people who have lots of interest in this project.
No, sometimes, no. So very hard to try and finance it, to be honest. And I think this thing of rewriting the treatment was like exhausting. You would just be like, oh, but I think writing is critical to the filmmaking. It's like, it's one of the most important things. It distills your ideas, and I think, shooting things is absolutely vital, but if it needs to be accompanied by good writing, and
I'm interested in how the final editor actually changed or improved the film at the end. Can you give us an example?
One example. There is an example. I think there'd be many times we would get into these, because Kieran and I were watching it constantly, and the place I work at, it's a very basic place, but it's like an old an old club, and they would have this kind of place, it's a cinema that we could project the film, and that was like absolutely imperative to what we were doing all the time, is that we would cut something, get to an edit, a rough cut, if you like, and then put it on the screen, and we'd be like, you'd see a million faults or a million problems with it, and it was vital to what we did. And I think towards the end, you just become blind to things. You would become blind to various cuts of things. And there was this scene, I don't know if you remember it, but it's kind of like the turning point where it's like the film initially is sunny and warm looking, and then it turns and it starts to rain, and everything starts to kind of go to shit in David's race. Or so this turning point, it was like we knew we wanted lots of this kind of the scenes that were in there were brilliant and vital. It's like there's a scene where David's arguing with a commissaire who's got a problem with his bike. You don't know any of this, but you can see David's getting stressed and he's getting annoyed and angry. And it's just, they've just been, they have just kind of gone to bed. They've, then they're up in the morning. So this is like the idea that it's the kind of morning time. They're on the turbo trainers. There's pressure mounting on David. He's starting to kind of unravel. And so there's this kind of scene where it's a bit like he has just told me that he doesn't want to talk. He kind of gets a bit irritated with me that he doesn't want to talk about the drugs thing, because I ask him to relay the drugs thing again, and he kind of starts, I don't want to talk about that. Thomas starts to talk about him, saying, David's different from others and he thinks too much. And then you see him arguing with it. So all of this stuff was in kind of quite chunky scenes, and it just felt like you were like almost repeating things, and you were going through all the scenes and you're a bit like, oh. So it had this kind of step down feel about it, but Kieran and I couldn't work it out. We were like, well, none of this can go because it's essential. It's good to see David getting angry or David struggling. So what Dino did, a kind of very simple thing, he started intercutting these scenes of the bikes, the guys on bikes, David kind of feeling exhausted, with the guy, the argument he's having. And is Thomas over the top of it as well that wasn't there before? Can't remember. But so it's all intercut, and it makes everything work far more efficiently than before, because before it felt like you were kind of going through a kind of swamp. It felt so heavy, you know, whereas Dino just kind of cut it up, and it was brilliant, you know. So things like that. And I suppose all the way through, he would be just talking, trying to quiz us on different scenes, and it just, you would get carried away. And like that opening scene, I could watch that opening scene for probably a few more minutes, you know, because I think it's so, it was when everything worked in how we were trying to shoot it. And I think it's just visually such a beautiful image of, it's like a painting, the lines on the road, the way the shutter speed's working. But at the end of the day, it becomes slightly, you know, as a viewer, it becomes a bit mundane, you know. It's also, you have all these other things of like, you know, David there's like a paddock before he goes on the ramp to start his time trial. There's a paddock where he's like circling, and we had this always up until right towards the end, we had this like circling happening, which was very kind of mesmerizing and interesting. And it's like the build up to this big poof, he's off on the time trial. And then, but actually all I ever wanted in the film was like, you're in it, you know, you're like thrown into this like world rather than gradually going into this world. It was like you're in it and you're like sounds and chaos. And that's what, I suppose, Dino helped with just distilling some of those ideas, you know, towards the end. And
interesting. And so what's next?
The dreaded question. There's lots of things kind of burning away. I think, especially this last year, it's kind of killed a couple of things, or not killed a couple of things. Just there's a film I want to make in Colombia, which I started shooting, was it last February, just before lockdown happened. We went to Colombia and shot some things, amazing things. And then I came back and there was, the whole lockdown happened and you're like, oh, well, it's fine. You can edit stuff and you're cutting these things together. And then you realize you can't go back. So I don't know when we're going to be able to go back. So it's another project that I can't wait to do. It's going to be like beautiful. And so we have a little bit of money from Screen Scotland to do that.
Can you reveal a little bit about it? What did you shoot? Or was it people? Was it scenery? Was it something in particular? Or someone?
No, I'm not being deliberately abstract. Well, slightly maybe.
That's okay.
No, it's people. It's kind of cycling related again, I suppose, but it's much more about the kind of, because Colombia is a huge cycling country,
Oh, I didn't know that.
and it's so it's going to be a completely different film to, like, time trial was the pinnacle of the sport, these fine-tuned athletes, this psychological kind of turmoil, if you like, whereas the Colombian film is like the absolute kind of grassroots of the sport, in a way, the humble beginnings of it. And they're some of the best riders in the world, and I kind of wanted to go and investigate that. So it's like cyclists from all over, and it's a beautiful thing. It's much more about people than cycling, really. But yeah,
interesting.
And but yeah, this last kind of period, I think of there's another couple of things in the ether as well, but I think what I've done in the last while is really, I've always worked with other people and DOPs, editors, and all the rest of it. And I think this whole period has been really good for me to actually just not use any of that and really start to understand how to, cut things myself, and shoot things. And so I've been doing lots of kind of experimental things, really. And I don't know if they'll ever see the light of day, but yeah, no, it's been really good for that, I think. But I'm not saying the pandemic's been good for anything, to be honest. But in a way, really focusing on my practice is really interesting for me, and it'll definitely, things that I'm doing will carry on through my filmmaking, yeah. So yeah, lots of things.
Interesting. And what's it like running a production company? You also running a production company? Is it a separate thing, or is it connected with all your projects?
It's connected with all my projects, yeah. So it's with Sonia Henrizi, who's the producer, and it's just been difficult this last year of trying to get these projects off the ground. I think it was just a difficult point for us to, as we were finding our feet, to try and, literally really started at the start of this lockdown period. So it kind of screwed us a little bit, like with everyone. But we have a few projects that are on the go, and one that will, working with these great animators, Will Anderson and Ainsley Henderson, and this big, it's a kind of hybrid documentary animation. But yeah, no, it's kind of, it's okay doing the both, I think. Yeah, I can produce things, but to a certain point, I think I'm not like the best producer in the world. I think for my own projects, I'm driven to producing them. But I think with any other projects, I'm not going to be a sole producer on things, because I think I need somebody else just along the way,
And how does Sonia Henrique contribute? What do you get from your producer? Are you on the same ballpark in terms of vision, or does she add a different voice to ideas and projects?
Yeah,
Practical.
she does, yeah. And comes from we're completely different in our sensibilities and thoughts about things, and I think she comes from a completely different angle. And very practical in what she does, in how she thinks about things. Yeah, and kind of challenges you in a different way, that's not just, you know not just an obstruction, which some producers can feel like that. It's complete getting in the way constantly, and she's definitely not that. She's definitely wants to try and nurture and bring the film out with you. She's and very no, yeah, maybe not that kind of hard-nosed producer type, which can can be difficult to work with. But no, she's very
So she facilitates.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, no, definitely, completely, which is useful. You need that.
Brilliant. Final words, philosophies on life.
Oh, I don't know. I think this last year's been a bit of a challenge in terms of just having a child. She's however 18 months old. It's philosophies on life. I don't know. Yeah, you kind of want to leave something behind. You want to make sure you enjoy what you do and live in the moment. For me, I need to live much more in the moment, and I want to have fun with what I'm doing. And I think making films has its difficulties, and they're around for a long time, these films, initially, when you're making them. And I think it's to enjoy that and remember that privilege that you have, that you're in that position, and not
What would make things easier in your filmmaking life?
I think what would make things easier, I think, to be able to, this is like a kind of boring thing to say, but I think to be able to pay yourself properly, and to be able to live a way that you're not constantly struggling and feel like you're penny pinching all the time. I think that's difficult, and it's a difficult balance to make. I think you can't have it all. You can't have the big house and nice car and lots of money, and to be able to do exactly as you please.
But some filmmakers have, and do you think that's related to the commerciality of certain projects, or how do you approach your projects? Are you
possibly
going for the buck or for the audience, or are you going for something that feels very close to your heart?
Yeah, the second, absolutely. It has to be. I think it's too difficult to make films, and you have to be absolutely driven to do it. It has to be from the heart. I think, not to say I wouldn't do commercial films, absolutely, and I do some commercial things, but it's to make these films, I think that it's always that fine balance of what's going to be commercially viable and sell, and be close to your heart, and something that you've slogged and slaved your way over making. I think it's always that constant balance, and but to say we should have more money, I'm not sure, but I think there's certain ways that it's very hard to estimate how long a film's going to take, or how long the development period is going to be, and how long the treatment writing's going to take. I'm always constantly can't really estimate it, you know. And I think in a very commercial way, you can be really quick and efficient and say, right, you just bash it out, and then you reread it a few months later and you're like, yeah, that doesn't sound quite right, or maybe I could have thought about that more. And I think with these films you make, they're a constant development stage, and I don't think financiers necessarily understand how that works, you know, because they see it as, well, we give you money, you make the film, and you know, there's no such thing really in documentaries like green lighting a project, you know, unless you're one of the few producers or directors that are commercially viable, and you know, which is barely any really in documentaries. Right.
Is there any differences? You've been around the world, you've been to festivals, you've met many filmmakers, I assume. How do their experiences differ from yours, or is it similar in terms of getting projects off the ground?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's just different ways. I always remember, like in Sweden, they were incredibly. I'm not saying Screen Scotland's super supportive to me, you know, and us. They always have been, and they're brilliant in a way, but they can't always be the ones that are just financing us to do our thing, you know. But I always remember in the kind of Scandinavian countries they're not afraid to say, yep, I want to be paid this much. It's going to take 3 years to develop this film, and you'll get it in, you know, you'll receive the project in 6 or 7 years' time. I think they have that kind of confidence and an ability to that's okay, you know. I don't know whether it's because of their economy or, you know, whatever, but or smaller countries, or, but yeah, Scotland's small. But here there's always this kind of maybe a mistrust in what you're doing, and they want to micromanage so many times. Right. And I'm not talking about Screen Scotland. Again, they're absolutely not like that. But broadcasters can be, or bigger funds in the UK can be, and it's like, that's not the way, you know. They want you to make that film. You've come with them with this idea. Now let them kind of get on with it in so many ways, you know. And I think that balance can be difficult to achieve, you know. But yeah, I would say in the Scandinavian countries they seem to have it good, and in America maybe they have a kind of clever way of this much more anthropological, or private people will fund filmmakers they like more. I think there's a more giving and supportive community in that, although they don't really have any kind of funds, public funds really, that are available for filmmaking. So it's just, yeah, it's all different.
Yeah, a few. They have a few. I think maybe the people like the Ford Foundation or PBS and stuff. Interesting.
Yeah, but there's no way any of them would get involved in a film about a cyclist, you know, coming to the end of his career, or, you know, they're much more about issues or social issues, and I think that's where documentary gets caught up in constantly, you know, and that's which is, you know, the way it is. But
what about a company like a cycling company or a sports company? Would you ever consider? Have they ever approached you to?
Yeah, I've done a couple of things with them, but the cycling companies don't have much money ever, you know. And even the big brands, they don't have much money. Cycling's such a small sport in terms of, very still, even though it's like
everyone's heard of the Tour de France.
Yeah, but difficult.
And influences? Were there films that influenced your films?
Or
even books or anything?
Yeah, well, a huge filmmaker is a huge influence. is Werner Herzog. I think he is an amazing filmmaker, you know, from talking about all of his films. I think he's incredibly versatile and bright, and he'll just do unexpected things constantly, you know, and I think he's constantly changing, questioning. I think he's an amazing filmmaker. Yeah, films that have oh, yeah, there's so many really. There's yeah, I don't know what I think, but as a one filmmaker, I think Herzog was the one that really captured my imagination. I think, you know, he kind of, in the way he makes films, I think is just
Give us an example. What do you mean? One thing.
Yeah, what is it? Stroysek or Stroychek, the kind of fiction film he made in, what was it, the 70s or 80s. I think is a perfect example of this kind of, you know, these people are normal people. They're not actors, and he took them from Germany, took them to America, and made this film. Oh, sorry. Oh, one sec. Oh. Yeah, no. And he came from this, and he took these people that he'd met and used in another film of his and took them to America and made this film. And I think it's like, I love the kind of bravado in it, and this, like, this story, these folk were like fish out of water, and that was the whole idea of the film. And they were kind of going to discover the American dream, and I just find it so kind of magical. The end is just a magical moment that's just very simple, but like, I don't know if you've seen it. I won't spoil it. But it's yeah, just with a chicken and the music and the kind of sound design is just like bizarre. It's bizarre and completely understandable and brutal and devastating and sad, and but kind of with a kind of comical twist. I think it's just quite amazing. I think also, like, Little Dieter Needs to Fly is just a beautiful documentary, and what I like about Herzog, he's always, you know, people say he's an arch manipulator and a control freak and all that kind of thing, but to me, he's just trying to tell a good story, you know, and there's nothing that's good, and he's very inventive and taking this guy with PTSD who was captured in the Vietnam War and basically reenacting it with him in the jungle, you know, in Vietnam, and and you see the guy's face. It's just like incredibly brutal, but it's fascinating and just, phenomenal. You know, I think he's and he had this kind of thing that Dieter had, this like tick that he would like try door handles a few times, you know, and or close doors and open doors or something. I haven't seen it for years, and it's just it's a fabrication of Herzog thinking somebody like him might have that kind of tick, you know, with all that kind of trauma, and it just tells a story. It gets you into the guy's headspace and his existence, which I think is just brilliant, very inventive. Even if it is a fabrication, it's like he's interpreting what Dieter is going through in his own way, in a visual way, which is far more interesting than him Dieter saying it, you know?
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I could see the parallel with time travel. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And Finlay, Pretsell, thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to watching more of your films soon.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Cheers.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. This podcast is sponsored by Camera Museum of London and Tang Cigars, located at 44 Museum Street, London. Thank you for listening to a Fish Out of Water podcast. This is your host, Richard Lipman. Should you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please get in touch.